Hello, I'm Geetha Gurumurthy. This is the Iran War Today, our daily briefing, bringing you up to date with all you need to know on day 74 of the US-Israel war with Iran. The US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth is grilled by Congress over the cost of the war, which the Pentagon says has climbed to nearly $29 billion. The world's most powerful leaders are due to meet. President Trump will head to China for high-stakes talks with President Xi Jinping, with the Iran war looming large over their meeting. An Iranian official threatens to accelerate Iran's nuclear weapons programme if America resumes fighting. The UK announces it will contribute drones, jets and a warship to multinational missions to secure the Strait of Hormuz. Inside Iran, 3 people involved in the January protests are sentenced to death as the regime continues to crack down on dissent. Starting in the United States, where President Trump is preparing for an historic summit in China alongside President Xi Jinping. Well, the Iran war will be a pressing issue when the world's 2 most powerful leaders meet. Meanwhile, Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth has been testifying before Congress, facing questions over the spiralling cost of the Iran war. The Pentagon says the war has cost the United States nearly $29 billion so far.
We fight to win in every scenario, to include ensuring Iran never has a nuclear weapon. The $1.5 trillion FY27 budget put forward by the president will build upon the historic $1 trillion FY26 top line and will continue to reverse 4 years of underinvestment and mismanagement of the Biden administration.
Well, let's cross to DC and speak to Bernd de Boosman. And Bernd, thanks for being with us. Pete Hegseth there defending the increasing costs of the war at the same time as inflation in the US is going up. How is that going to be received by ordinary Americans, of course, struggling like so many others with the cost of living pressures?
Well, I think what we saw earlier today was that Democrats and Republicans alike are growing increasingly concerned about that spiraling cost and what it means for their constituents. The $29 billion figure put on it is $4 billion higher than was told to lawmakers just last week. Part of that concern is that it's unclear how long these costs will keep amounting. It's enormously expensive to keep U.S. forces in the region to enforce the blockade on Iranian ports and potentially go back to combat operations. He also faced quite a lot of questions about the depletion of U.S. munitions, and he denies that they are in fact depleted. But it's showing that there's quite a lot of concern about what this means over an extended time frame. And it should be noted that $29 billion cost tag that's been put on this war so far, that doesn't include damage to U.S. bases and assets that were struck by Iranian forces in the opening days of the war. So I think broadly what you're seeing now is that even from within President Trump's own parties, there are concerns about how long this war will continue to be a financial burden on the United States at a time when so many Americans are concerned about the price of petrol, for example, about inflation. And that's, I think, kind of what we saw from lawmakers from both sides of the aisle today on Capitol Hill.
And President Trump is heading to China for a summit with President Xi Jinping. How much will the Iran war loom over that meeting?
Well, while this meeting was originally not intended to be about Iran, I think it's fair to say this might dominate the discussion between the two of them. What the White House hopes is that Iran's own economic links with China will make it also want the war to wrap up quickly, and that the U.S. can kind of lean on China to in turn lean on Iran to bring this to a close. There's also the issue of sanctions. In recent days, the U.S. has sanctioned a number of Chinese-linked individuals and firms they say are benefiting Iran's war effort, and they've repeatedly signaled that they're willing to do the same to, for example, Chinese banks that they say Iran is using to stay within the global financial system. That's kind of a very important aspect of this. But I think it's fair to say that President Trump will be hoping that President Xi can use his own influence with the Iranian leadership to push him to come to the negotiating table with a deal that the U.S. sees as workable, which has so far eluded the White House.
Bernd de Boosman, many thanks indeed. Time after time, the US and Iran have failed to find common diplomatic ground and make meaningful progress on peace talks. President Trump called Iran's latest counter-proposals, quote, a piece of garbage. And in response, Iran has taken the hostile language up another level. One Iranian lawmaker warned that Iran could enrich uranium up to weapons-grade level if Iran is attacked again. a threat which will infuriate the Trump administration, no doubt. Well, on the ever-escalating rhetoric, here's our Middle East correspondent Caroline Davies in Dubai.
After the comments by President Trump calling this latest proposal from the Iranians to be garbage, we also heard from the parliamentary speaker of Iran, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. He said that it was important that the US had no alternative but to accept the 14-point proposal. And he also said that the longer the US dragged its feet, the more American taxpayers would pay for it. But there's another point as well that actually happened in the course of the last few hours. We also heard from another Iranian official, the Foreign Policy and National Security Committee spokesperson, who said that if Iran was attacked again, one option could be that it could look at 90% enrichment. Now, many people will assume that that is relating to the enrichment of uranium. Of course, the big question is whether or not Iran would have the capacity to be able to enrich, because of course after last summer President Trump said that the US and Israeli offensive last year against Iran obliterated, in his words, the nuclear facilities that Iran has. So would there be even the capacity for Iran to be able to do that? But many people will see that particular statement as very inflammatory, given the fact that, of course, the US and the US and Iran negotiating position when they were in Islamabad having those face-to-face discussions. It was Vice President J.D. Vance said that the reason that those talks were not able to come to a conclusion was because of Iran's stance on its ability to enrich uranium and to have at some point have that sort of nuclear capacity.
Caroline Davies there. Let's focus now on what life is like inside Iran, where the political and economic situation is becoming increasingly difficult. On the economic front, tens of thousands of workers have been laid off from their jobs at the same time as the cost of daily essential goes up. The political situation is increasingly fraught. Earlier today, 3 protesters from the January protests were sentenced to death. Let's speak to BBC Persian's World Affairs correspondent Gia Gol. Gia, just tell us more in terms of what you're hearing of what life is like at the moment for citizens living under the regime.
Well, the economy is shrinking and the situation is so dire. Many people in Iran, mass majority of them, are struggling. Many cannot afford even buy essential food. The price of essential food, like bread, like meat, like eggs, something between 120 to 150% have increased in the past 2.5 months. And I think this is the situation people are facing. Hundreds of thousands of people from different sectors, industry, technology, petroleum, and also hospitality have been laid off. This is according to Iran's own ILNA, which is Workers' News Agency. I think this is affecting the society as a whole. In the same time, it seems, yes, in one hand, Gita, the Iranian Islamic Republic trying to depict a position of power, a position that they are not in a hurry to opening up Strait of Hormuz or negotiating with the US. But in reality, inside the country, the situation is so bad. They are so worried about uprising in the country. We can say in the past 2 months, almost every week, they have been executing young men. Simply, they don't want people come back to the street. In the past 2 months, 30 young men have been executed, and all of them political prisoners, and most of them, they have been protesters who have been arrested in nationwide protests in January.
Gia Gol, thank you. Let's turn now to the Strait of Hormuz. The UK has announced it'll contribute drones, jets and a warship to multinational missions to secure the strait. The waterway is a vital route for oil and gas and fertilisers, but the narrow passageway sandwiched between Iran and Oman effectively remains closed, presenting an enormous threat to economies around the world. Frank Gardner, our security correspondent, is with us. Frank, what does this UK mission mean?
Well, it's part of a wider plan to try and safeguard the Strait of Hormuz, but only once this war ends. And this war between the US and Israel on one hand and Iran on the other is only on pause. There is a distinct possibility that, given that diplomacy is not working, proposals and counter-proposals have gone back and forth between the US and Iran via Pakistan, none of which have been agreed to. There's a distinct possibility that it'll go back to a full-scale war. Obviously, nobody wants that to happen, but this proposal of sending in all these high-tech kit can only work once there is a deal that pacifies the Strait of Hormuz.
Frank Gardner, many thanks. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Thanks for joining us with the Iran War Today.